What up, folks? What's going on? Welcome to the Spun Today Podcast, the podcast that is anchored in writing, but unlimited in scope. I'm your host, Tony Ortiz, and I appreciate you listening. This is episode 154. And in this episode, I speak about Joe Rogan and Spotify's $100+ million podcast deal. The plus is important there, and we'll get into it. I also speak about UFC 249, a coronavirus update from me, and watching Better Call Saul Season 5. But before we dive in, I want to tell you guys about two quick ways that you can help support the show. First off, I have a new Spun Today t-shirt design available on my viral style page, which I'll link to in the episode notes, as always. The design is based on those New York City, but probably other cities have the same thing as well. But this style of plastic bag that like Chinese food places give you and a bunch of different stores and supermarkets that you may shop at, that it's a thank you that's written like seven times, like vertically, one on top of the other, says thank you, thank you, thank you. And it's like a red outline thank you, and it's transparent in the middle, and then the middle thank you is like a solid red. Then at the very bottom it says have a nice day. It's that style design, but instead of thank you, it says Spun Today a bunch of times. And then on the bottom right, instead of have a nice day, it says podcast. Although I do wish that you all have a nice day. It's definitely not an original idea. I've seen it done before, but I thought it was really cool and decided to do my own version of. It's printed on these good quality, soft cotton tees. So check it out on my viral store page, which is viralstyle.com/store/Spun Today/Tony Ortiz. And if you're not going to remember that long ass link, don't worry. I link to it in the episode notes of every single episode, including this one. So check it out. And as always, my weekly newsletter is a great way for you to help support the show. It's absolutely free. It's a good way to stay in touch, and also for you to receive some dope content directly in your inbox every single Monday at noon to help your days go by a little quicker. And here's a little bit more about the Midday Monday Boost Letter. You know that feeling that you get on a Monday when you're sad because the weekend is over and you have nothing to look forward to except for lunch? Have no fear, the Midday Monday Boost Letter is here. And you might be thinking, what is the Midday Monday Boost Letter? Sounds like a mouthful. And it is, but it's also more than that. I put together this absolutely free newsletter that I email to all my subscribers every Monday at noon to spread a little joy and happiness. If you choose to subscribe, all you have to do is go to spuntoday.com/subscribe and drop in your email address. And what you'll get is 5 things. You'll get a photo of the week, which who doesn't like looking at dope pictures? You'll also get a podcast of the week. I listen to dozens and dozens of podcasts every single week from a wide variety of shows, and I cherry pick the very best ones and share them with you as my recommendation for that week. Also in the Midday Monday Boost Letter, you will find a video of the week, which could be anything from a cool online recipe that I found, to a rap battle, to a TED Talk, or a dope interview. I also share a quote of the week, a little food for thought, as well as a word of the week for my fellow wordsmiths out there. Again, this is all absolutely free, and you can get my newsletter by going to spuntoday.com/subscribe, drop in your email address, and you will get the very next one. Joe Rogan, I was about to call him the Podfather, but he himself says, even though a lot of folks call him that and attribute that title to him, says that it's definitely not him. Someone by the name of Adam Curry that literally created the term podcast, him and his team, along with the RSS dissemination mechanism by which all podcasts are distributed. How they go from, for example, me recording this into a microphone right now, into you receiving it in your earbuds almost immediately after being broadcast. There's him. There's folks that started podcasting about a year to 2 years tops before Rogan. Rogan's been podcasting for about 11 years now. And that's folks like Mark Maron, which started his podcast about a year before Rogan's. Adam Carolla as well, around 6 months to a year before Rogan. So folks like that, he says, are the real podfathers, but still. Joe's obviously a behemoth in this space, especially after this. Joe Rogan inked a deal with Spotify to have his podcast exclusively on Spotify. And the deal's worth over $100 plus million. Or should I say that Spotify inked a deal with Joe Rogan to allow them to exclusively house his podcast on their platform. A little bit more on that a bit later. Now, here's what we know about the deal so far. Joe announced it himself on his Instagram as a message to his followers, and, he tweeted it out himself as well on his Twitter, obviously, right? And my initial knee-jerk reaction was, fuck. Because I was like, Rogan is Mr. Independent. He's Mr. Free-form podcast. He's known for turning away hundreds of thousands of dollars from advertisers that he doesn't want to put on his show because he only wants to fuck with sponsors and products that he believes in and uses and supports. And that in and of itself, set that standard for a lot of podcasters. It helps set an integrity standard that thousands of podcasts follow. Of course, you'll still see podcasts with, or listen to podcasts with, sponsors like Burger King and McDonald's and stuff like that. But that's definitely not the standard within the space, which I think would have gone differently if leaders within the space like Rogan and Carolla and others would have went that very commercial route from the jump. But anyway, so he's known for being the type of host and the type of person, the type of podcast that is going to do what they want to do their way without any outside interference. So hearing that he's signing a deal with Spotify, my knee-jerk reaction was, oh, fuck. What's going to change? What's going to be different? Why is he even doing this? Then I started looking into the deal a bit, with all the public information on the deal that's out there. And my fears of the show not existing in the form that I've come to love from all these years of listening, going back now at least 8 or 9 years for myself, that quickly subsided. Then I started to see the deal for the dope chess move that it is on both parts, both on Rogan's part and Spotify's part. So this is the way it breaks down. It's reported as $100+ million deal up front for a 3-year licensing deal of Rogan's podcast. According to Rogan, absolutely nothing is changing with the way the podcast is done. He's still doing it the same way with the same people, meaning pretty much Jamie, which is the producer of the podcast. Jamie Vernon, shout out to him. Funny ass memes and quotes and shit online about that. They say, Jamie's going to be rolling up to the podcast soon in a custom gold-plated Ferrari or some shit. Because, he's definitely getting broken off lovely. But yeah, he's going to be continuing to do the show the exact same way, which has been the case from the episodes that have been released since this was reported. The way it's going to work is that as of September 1st, the 11 years of the back catalog of the show will move over to Spotify and be available on Spotify, which was not the case before, interestingly enough. And I wonder if that was a calculated decision from, years ago. Because my podcast, for example, you can get on Spotify. The Spun Today Podcast is available on Spotify. I'm not holding out on Spotify. You know what I mean? Very, very, very tiny fish. But I wonder if that was a strategic move by Joe's part, with the foresight of getting them to come to the table or something. I don't know. That's just me speculating. But anyway, so as of September 1st, the 11 years of the back catalog of the Joe Rogan Experience podcast will be available on Spotify. All existing shows up until that point will also be available on other streaming services like iTunes and Stitcher and everywhere else you get your podcast, as it is now. Then, as of January, all new content will be exclusively on Spotify, meaning all new episodes of the Joe Rogan Experience podcast will exclusively be available on Spotify and not on any of the other apps. It's no longer going to be on Apple, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, etc., etc., etc. Now I'm going to tell you guys where the two major differences come in from my perspective. from a user perspective, it being on Spotify, not a big deal. Instead of using the Apple's app on my phone, I'll click on the Spotify app on my phone. And you listen to the podcast the same exact way as always. Completely free for anybody that wants to listen. Now, I would put a small asterisk on that, because Spotify, the way Spotify works is that when you listen to a show on Spotify, a podcast on Spotify, or music on Spotify, you get ads in between every once in a while, right? Unless you pay the $10 a month, I believe it is, for the premium Spotify version, then you listen to anything and everything that you want, commercial free. Even with that, I don't think it's a big difference, because Rogan has like 5 to 6 minutes worth of ads in front of every single episode of the podcast now, which in the Spotify model, I would imagine is not going to be the same. Like, he's not going to have 6 minutes worth of his own personal ads that he's going to be generating income off of, then plus Spotify ads. You know what I mean? Like, that wouldn't make sense from Spotify's perspective. So that difference that I wanted to highlight, not a big deal from my perspective. Now, the second one is more of a big deal, but where I see it's also more of where I see the chess move being played, if you will, from both sides, Rogan's and Spotify's, which is that the podcast interviews are no longer going to be available on YouTube. Now, I'm not sure if that counts for the 11 years worth of backlog interviews that have always been available on YouTube, but they're either all going away, all those full interview videos, or the new content is not going to be available on YouTube, but the 11 years of back catalog will be. But Spotify is going to start a video portion of their podcast just based on Rogan's show. So you can still definitely see the videos of the interviews, but it's going to be exclusive also on Spotify. Which, I mean, I have to see what the functionality is like when it gets created, because it's still something that doesn't exist. Which, by the way, just shows what a huge investment Spotify is making, not just in the Joe Rogan Experience podcast, but the podcast space in general. It's a testament to that, because they're opting to create an alternative to YouTube, which is ubiquitous within the video space. So hopefully the functionality is as seamless and easy to use as YouTube is. I would imagine, embedded within their own app, it would be. I wonder what the online browser version is going to look like, because I do like watching some of the interviews. The vast majority of shows that I listen to, the vast majority of all podcasts that everybody listens to, it's just the audio version, like through apps. So for most folks, this isn't even going to matter. But because they do listen to or like watching rather some of the interviews, it's something that I'm definitely going to be paying attention for. Now, I do know that even when the show, in terms of video, goes exclusively on Spotify, Rogan's still going to keep his clips channel on YouTube, where he puts out clips of episodes, similar to how he always has, and how other podcasts do it, including myself, how I clip up episodes of portions of this show and put it on YouTube, as well as the full-length audio, because that serves as like content for the more casual fan or somebody that just happens to stumble on the video. They might not necessarily have the hour, 2 or 3 to invest in listening to like your whole shit, but if you put up a 5, 10, 15, 20-minute clip of a segment of your show, it kind of serves as like a commercial for your show and also just more content. So that's going to continue to be on YouTube. And that's also where I think we can see that that this deal has been in the works for a while, because I'm sure it's not the first time that Spotify and other platforms have approached Rogan to try to get some sort of exclusivity deal. He's by far the biggest player in the space. But I would say about 5, maybe 6 months ago, he switched his show from being completely live, streamed and unedited. So like when a guest went on his show, whomever it was live, always on YouTube. From Bernie Sanders, Elon Musk, you name it, every single episode for 11 years has been live streamed on YouTube. If you watch the live stream, then you rewatch on YouTube again, it's the same exact unedited show. Listen to the audio, same exact unedited show, all 3 ways. Then about 5 to 6 months ago, he switched to pre-recording the show, not streaming it live, because while it was still unedited, it was because there were so many other YouTube channels that were taking the live content as it came out and creating those clips that I was just speaking of. Then by the time he went around to do the clips on his own clips channel, there were already viral clips of an episode that he just live streamed that had hundreds of thousands of hits on them already. So he switched to that just to have the exclusivity of those clips. And I wonder now how much that had to do with the Spotify deal and knowing that he was going to retain that like clips channel. And he obviously wanted to build that up exclusively as much as possible. But this is so dope from a podcast genre perspective. And I'm really excited that a deal this big is even happening. So to get back to it, it's a 3-year licensing deal, which means Rogan owns still 100% of the IP, the intellectual property of the show. He's in essence leasing out the show to Spotify to allow them to disseminate it on their platform and generate ad revenue from it in exchange for the $100+ million deal. So for 3 years. Now, some folks in the know, in a conversation that I was listening to, or not in the know, let me rephrase that. Some folks that are within the business, not just in the podcast game, but that have radio shows with iHeartMedia, for example, and are EPs on television shows, etc. I'm referring to like Charlamagne the God. He, Andrew Schulz, Brendan Schaub, he stated that $100+ million, if he had to guess, the way, deals are currently like being structured and, knowing what Rogan's numbers are, which I'll get into in a second, he's saying that it's probably 125 to 150 million upfront, and that he's sure that there's some back end money as well that will add up to another 100 to 150 million on the back end as well. So if true, this is potentially a $300 million deal. Not that 100 million is anything to sneeze at. I mean, that in and of itself is like such a huge deal. But the fact that it could be potentially double that is insane. And the way that he mapped it out was referring back to like Howard Stern's deal with Sirius Satellite and how there are bumps in contracts that you sign within this space. And for example, Howard Stern had the type of deal where if folks purchased a Howard Stern Sirius Satellite subscription, and it was because of Howard Stern, and the way companies like this track that is the same way like podcast advertising works. You have like promo code Rogan or promo code Joe Rogan or JRE or whatever when you sign up to Spotify. Or rather, that would be the way Spotify could track something like this. Depending on the number of folks that subscribe for Sirius Satellite for the Howard Stern show, he made bonus points on the back end, meaning more money on the back end. And Charlamagne was explaining that most likely, Rogan has that type of back end deal with Spotify as well, which is just even more insane. And the dopest part of it to me is that, it's a 3-year licensing deal. If after 3 years he didn't like it, it didn't go well, he'll just continue doing what he always was doing before. Lease is over, give the car back, get another one. You know what I mean? That type of thing. Or if it goes well, both parties are happy, re-up the deal, bump up the numbers even more, sign another 3-year lease, do something else. Who knows? Sky's the limit at this point. And for folks that may not know, and I always have like not a hard time, but it's like weird to try to explain how big Rogan's podcast is. Like, it's literally the biggest platform on the planet. And I'm not speaking just in the podcast space. And like knowing this and believing this is also what kind of put me at ease with the whole, like, my initial knee-jerk reaction thought of, oh fuck, he's going to Spotify, shit's going to change, is he selling out, quote unquote, what's going on. This type of shit is what puts me at ease. Rogan's podcast is widely known, non-disputed, to have at least 190 million downloads per month. Let that one sink in for a second. And for perspective, let me give you the numbers of Fox News, CNN, and MSNBC, primetime numbers, which according to an article from Statista, is measured by being 8 p.m. to 11 p.m. Fox News, CNN, MSNBC are always battling it out for that first place spot in terms of ratings, in terms of watch time. This article puts Fox at the top of the heap in April 2020 with 3.68 million primetime viewers in that month. They say the average total viewership for Fox within a given week is 3.54 million. So let's say 3.5 million. Matter of fact, let's say it's 4 million per week on an average week. Times that by 4 to get you a monthly number. So say 16 million for Fox News Rogan's podcast, again, is getting 190 million downloads per month. Like, if you just look at his YouTube numbers, which is for any podcast, especially Rogan's, but for any podcast, including mine, a fraction of the views of the downloads that you get versus the audio version. His videos get millions of views. So I say that just to say that that number equates to what folks estimate, and by folks, I'm referring to Forbes articles, Washington Post articles, Wall Street Journal articles, and people, prior to this, speculating on how much money Rogan makes from his podcast. He was making $30 million a year off his podcast alone. Add to that his multi-million-dollar deal with the UFC, because he's also the top commentator for the UFC, who the UFC has wanted him to do every single show that they do, every single pay-per-view that they do, and he used to. And he actually, when his contract renegotiations came up, he said he's either going to stop doing it altogether or scale it back to only do pay-per-views that take place within the US, so he doesn't have to travel as much. And of course, they granted him that because, again, he is the best commentator that the UFC has. Then add to that his investments in companies like On It, the supplement company, which is killing it, has sponsorships with many athletes within the UFC, for example, and other sports as well. His stand-up comedy, which he tours and sells out everywhere he goes. Multiple shows per week, every week. Stand-up comedy special deals with Netflix, for example, which he has, I think, 4 or 5 on Netflix alone. And where his quote-unquote big money came from back in the day deals with the show that he hosted, Fear Factor, which is a syndicated show, as well as the sitcom he was on, News Radio, which is also another syndicated show, etc., etc., etc. So I just say all that to say that him getting paid $100 million plus from Spotify, me knowing all those details, make me say, okay, he's not doing this for the money. He's not doing, well, I'm not going to say he's not doing it for the money, because I'm sure that was a big deciding factor there. But what I mean to say is that he's not going to all of a sudden change his show to appease Spotify for some reason with a licensing deal where they don't have the leverage to influence the way the show goes. Now, let me tell you what most folks speculate why he did the video portion of the deal with Spotify, which I actually agree with. For a long time, he's had I don't want to say beef, but an issue with the way YouTube and its algorithms work in terms of censorship, which, anybody that puts on anything up on YouTube would know, including myself, that whenever you have, let's say, a song or something that you might be discussing and you play a clip of, once it's on YouTube, it gets flagged almost immediately and demonetized. And for somebody like me now, with small half a dozen listeners that I have, it doesn't matter much, right? Now, if and when the podcast blows up, and I do have to, my channel is monetized, and I have to go back and all those channels, all those episodes that have been demonetized because of like a clip that I played or some music that I played in the background, I'm going to have to go back and re-edit those episodes to bleep out the music or mute out the music in order to be able to get paid from those episodes. But from someone that's getting millions of hits on videos, for that episode or video to be demonetized matters obviously way more. It's also whenever you speak on touchy subjects, and YouTube has gotten kind of authoritarian and very, very, very left-leaning to the point of kind of infringing on freedom of speech, but doing it in a spotty way that's not consistent. And you have some other egregious shit on YouTube. But if somebody happens to call, even if it's by mistake, Caitlyn Jenner a he, they're flagged, then it's considered hate speech. It's weird. So seeing that and being that YouTube is the only video game in town, the fact that Spotify is taking this chance on building this video version of their platform, leveraging Joe Rogan's audience to do so, I think is a dope chess move on their part. Siempre y cuando Rogan's not going to have Spotify's version of video censorship on their platform. You know what I mean? Because if that happens, then it's a bad move on Rogan's part, but still a good move on Spotify's part in terms of the whole censorship thing. Another reason why I think it's dope from Spotify's perspective, from a business perspective, is that Apple currently makes up 60% of the market share of podcatchers, meaning 60% of all podcasts that are listened to via Apple Podcasts. Spotify is clearly making a play within the podcast space. Has been for a while. They signed like Bill Simmons sports podcast to an exclusive deal as well. They're creating this whole video platform, and it's dope. It's good on them. Seeing that from them is encouraging, because I believed in podcasts for such a long time, since I first stumbled upon Joe Rogan's podcast, actually, which I probably wouldn't be doing this podcast if it wasn't for Rogan's. I don't want to say I wouldn't be writing, because I feel that I always had like that writing within me. I was writing on my own, before finding podcasts, but I wasn't doing it to the level that I'm doing it at now until after I found Rogan's podcast and listened to some of the dope conversations he had with folks on there, including writers. Listened to some of the writers like Graham Hancock, for example, who I then reached out to naively, and he actually responded to me via email and gave me writing advice. Folks like Daniele Bolelli, who I reached out to as well, and also gave me advice. Book recommendations like The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield that I found out about and heard of because of Rogan's podcast, that completely set me on a path of, okay, this is actually practically doable. Stephen King's on writing, and then just finding that podcast space, being roped into it, and then exploring out to find other podcasts. And then I was like, wait, I'm into writing and I'm into podcasts. Maybe this is a podcast on writing. And then I found Joanna Penn's podcast, The Creative Pen, which is just a treasure trove of practical information on nuts to bolts. If you want to write, if you want to put your work out there, here's how to do it. And I've been podcasting myself for 6 years now, and I was listening to Rogan's podcast for 3-4 years before that even. I still remember the very first episode that I heard. It was like in the 100 and somethings, 140 something, 130 something, 170 something, like somewhere around there. Now there's over 1,400 shows. First episode I ever listened to was with Ari Shaffir, and I was roped in immediately. So yeah, a deal like this is really encouraging. It's really raises the bar of potentiality for all podcasters everywhere, big and small. And I hope it's a source of inspiration for my fellow podcasters out there. I know it definitely is for me. And the last point that I want to touch on from a Spotify business perspective, before I play for you guys Joe Rogan's announcement, which is quick. It's like 10-15 seconds long, just so if you guys haven't heard it, I'll play it for you guys so you can listen to it. Then I'll probably be flagged on YouTube, but whatever. I just want to point out that from Spotify's perspective, since this announcement broke, their stock price over the past week has gone up over 15%, which translates into more than a 3 billion, billion uptick for Spotify shareholders. So it's an amazing deal on Rogan's part, an even more amazing deal on Spotify's part. And I'm eager to see and to follow and to continue being part of the trajectory of podcasts, because I honestly feel that we've just scratched the surface. Podcasts are going to become so much more ubiquitous than they are now. I think the number is like 50 to 70% of people even have heard the term podcast before, or maybe I don't even think maybe it's that high. I think it's like 30 to 50%. I forget what the exact number is, but that's going to continue growing. The seriousness that podcasts are going to be looked upon with is going to increase the respect of folks that put out quality work, because there's a lot of shit out there, including maybe even my podcast. Some folks might look at it as shit, and you're obviously entitled to that opinion, but go fuck yourself. You're definitely going to have now a more of a commercial wave of podcasts, I feel. And you even see it within corporations. Like, I'm not going to mention specifics, but I remember about 3 years ago doing a write-up at work that I wound up actually not sending out because the company wound up being sold to another company and yada yada. But speaking to how the company should have a podcast component to it, and companies like Bloomberg, have already been doing this for a few years, and there's a demand within the finance space for finance-based podcasts. And like The Motley Fool has its own podcast, which is dope, that I recommend and listen to. Bloomberg, like I said, has a few different ones. And then the Fortune 500 company that wound up buying us, or the company that I worked for, they, about I want to say 6 months to a year after that point in time when I did that podcast write-up, they started their own podcast. And you see it in places like HBO, for example. Like if any of you guys watch Insecure, which is a dope season going on right now. I'm definitely going to speak about it when the season is over. I like the show. I think it's dope. Shout out to Issa Rae. But if you see, even within the traditional, quote unquote, I guess you can call them media, cable media, like HBO, like the Insecure show has its own official Insecure podcast, the Insecure T podcast. And you have a lot of unofficial podcast shows, right? Like there's probably dozens of podcasts just about the show Insecure that are out there. But now there's an official component to it, and it's plastered right there. Like when you watch HBO, like on HBO Go or something like that, you can, just like you can click on to watch the show, you can click on to watch the recap of the show, you can click on to watch the sneak peek of the upcoming show. You can also now click on to watch or listen to the Insecure T, aka the Insecure podcast. And we're going to see much more of that type of shit going on. Watch. Tip of the iceberg, folks. All right, and with that, let me hop off of Rogan and Spotify's nuts for a second and play for you guys the announcement clip of the Joe Rogan Experience podcast change.
Hello, everybody. I have an announcement. The podcast is moving to Spotify. I signed a multi-year licensing agreement with Spotify that will start on September 1st. Starting on September 1st, the entire JRE library will be available on Spotify as well as all the other platforms. Then somewhere around the end of the year, it will become exclusive to Spotify, including the video version of the podcast. It will be the exact same show. I am not going to be an employee of Spotify. We're going to be working with the same crew doing the exact same show. The only difference will be it will now be available on the largest audio platform in the world. Nothing else will change. It will be free. It will be free to you. You just have to go to Spotify to get it. We're very excited to begin this new chapter of the JRE, and I hope you're there when we cross over. Thanks.
Alrighty, UFC 249. This was the first post-coronavirus, I believe, in all sports, live sporting event. Definitely the first UFC after the coronavirus. So it was a bit weird because there was no crowd, for starters, and you can hear everything. I never appreciated how much noise the crowd actually makes until they're not there to make that noise. You hear the announcers more, like Rogan, Daniel Cormier, John Anik, and you hear every single strike much more. You can even almost hear the fighters like talk shit to each other. You hear them breathing a little bit, like when they start breathing heavy. So it was a very eerie, different kind of way to watch the fight, in my opinion. I also noticed that there weren't any walkouts, or at least they didn't like televise the walkouts the way they normally do. But I think that was just before the main card, because then I did see the walkouts for like Gaethje and Ferguson, and I believe Ngannou and Rosenstrike, etc. But anyway, those were the things that I found weird. But besides that, definitely hype to see or to watch a UFC event again after a couple months of not seeing any. And I'm sure those of you that are fans definitely appreciate that as well. So the first fight that I paid attention to was my boy Thug Nasty, Bryce Mitchell versus Charles Rosa. I know Bryce from watching The Ultimate Fighter, and as well as a couple interviews that I saw him on, memorably on Theo Von's This Past Weekend podcast. And he just has like a dope personality. He's like a down south guy. I think he's from Arkansas, so he has that like southern twang. Like he's definitely hunted and eaten squirrel and shit. Tells a story about choking out a fucking deer. It's a dope episode. You guys should check it out. But anyway, he's known more for his striking. Charles Rosa was is a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and was the presumptive better grappler of the two. What was dope to see about this fight is that Thug Nasty actually took the fight to the ground and completely dominated. The entire fight was mostly on the ground. Bryce clearly dominated and won in a decision. The only other thing I want to say about that is, yo, Reebok, get my boy his camel shorts already. What the fuck are you guys waiting on? Then the very next fight between Vicente Luque and Nico Price was back and forth striking action. Back and forth, back and forth. And again, you could hear every fucking strike. So it was heightened even more. Price got noticeably wobbled a couple times, but he fought his way through it. And it was like one of those fights where you're like, fuck, Price is going to be wobbled, fight his way through, and then wind up knocking out Luque. But then Luque knocked Price down after wobbling him a few times with like a perfect textbook left hook. And I'm not sure if that like cut Nico or if he was just like dazed from it. But the ref called the doctor in, I believe, or maybe it was between rounds at that point when the doctor looked at Nico Price, and then the doctor gave the ref some feedback, and then based on that feedback, the ref decided to stop the fight and call it a TKO victory for Vicente Luque. Carla Esparza beat my homegirl Michelle Karate Hottie Watterson in a 3-round decision, but honestly it was a bit of a snooze fest for me, at least. So I don't have much else on that. I also didn't pay much attention to the Olenek and Verdum fight, but Olenek won in a 3-round decision. Then the next fight that I was excited about was Anthony Showtime Pettis versus Donald Cowboy Cerrone. Now, this fight was similar to the Luque and Price fight in that it was dope back and forth striking battle, but it was like a higher level striking, two absolute veterans with Muay Thai, kickboxing, Taekwondo styles all mixed together. Definitely makes for a dope striking match. I thought this was a pretty close fight. I thought it was close. Just, not looking at scoring, not looking at anything like that, just like watching the fight, it looked really close. It was back and forth striking, like I said. Cowboy had a couple takedowns, but Pettis seemed like the stronger one. Like he was causing more damage with the striking, even though the striking was going back and forth. Cowboy hit him with like a shin to the face, and he just ate it. I honestly thought it could have gone either way because of those takedowns and because the striking was so close. Then there was one point in the third, I want to say, where Cowboy definitely got poked in the eye, but it was like on the opposite side of where the ref was, so the ref didn't see it. Cowboy called it. Pettis kept striking, as he technically should, because the ref didn't like call a stop to it, and he himself was saying that Pettis was saying that was definitely not a poke, but then the instant replay definitely showed that it was a poke. So I don't think it was like malice on Pettis' part, like he just really didn't think it was a poke. But still, Cowboy like fought through that. They continued fighting, and Pettis wound up getting a unanimous decision, which again, to me, just watching the fight, it seemed like a much closer fight than that. So maybe a split decision victory either way is what I was expecting. But Pettis wound up getting the unanimous decision, which I was a bit surprised about. Still, dope fight. Greg Hardy versus Yorgan De Castro. Greg Hardy looked better than he has in previous fights. I think this is like his second or third fight in the UFC. And each time we see him, he seems to be getting a bit better. He's an ex-NFL player. Seems to be, getting his groove a little bit. But, still wasn't like too memorable of a fight for me, in my opinion. But Greg Hardy won in a 3-round decision. The next fight was pretty dope. Calvin Kattar versus Jeremy Stephens. Stephens was controlling, I thought, the first and second rounds. Even though Kattar was holding his own and Kattar's boxing was like really on point. He looked like a sharp boxer and he was holding his own, but Stephens seemed to be like controlling the pace, controlling the volume. And through the first and second rounds, I was giving it to Jeremy Stephens all the way. Then Kattar wound up knocking Stephens down with a straight right elbow. And then he pounced on him, hit him a couple more times, knocked him out, and won in the end of the second. Probably like 2 minutes left. Actually, no, I'm looking at it. 2 minutes and 49 seconds left. So midway through the second round in a TKO victory. And it took Jeremy Stephens a minute to get up. So he knocked him out pretty good. Then you have Francis Ngannou versus Rosenstrike in a Francis Ngannou 20-second victory. Francis Ngannou, I swear, is like the Mike Tyson right now of the UFC, of the heavyweight division. Did you guys hear, by the way, Tyson's going to do against Holyfield, a 3-round charity boxing event. He's training like a beast. If you check out his Instagram, he looks really good because if you remember, Tyson got, like pretty heavy set, like in the, Hangover 2 movie days and, his one-man show off Broadway. If you watch his podcast or if you've seen him on Rogan, he's a bit heavier, but now he looks fucking phenomenal. He looks fucking shredded right now. That's going to be interesting. But anyway, Francis Ngannou is like the UFC version of that with the way he knocks motherfuckers out. And he knocked out Rosenstrike in 20 seconds. He just blitzed him and just punched his fucking lights out. No way else I can put it. When Ngannou has a chance for the title, when he wins the title, because I don't see anybody beating him, I feel like he's gonna be a champ for a while, for a long fucking while. But we'll see, because he has lost, right? He can't be beat. Stipe just fucking was able to eat a barrage of punches from him and then just wrestle the fuck out of him. That's how he beat him. Then I was really excited, almost as much as the main event, excited for the co-main event of Henry Cejudo, Triple C, versus Dominic Cruz. Dominic Cruz, dope fighter. One of my favorite fighters in that division. One of my favorite fighters, period, in the bantamweight division. And Henry Cejudo, I can't stand. I've said it before on this podcast. I don't know why. I don't know what it is about him. Somebody tweeted, or I saw on Instagram or something like that, and made total sense to me. They called Henry Cejudo the king of cringe. It's I don't know what it is about him. I just, no lo paso a tipo, you know what I mean? He's just comes off as so, it's not even arrogant or cocky. It's just fake. It's when you're being arrogant and cocky, you look fake. You come off as fake. And when you're being Mr. Nice Guy, you come off as fake. It's what the fuck are you? So clearly I was rooting for Dominic Cruz, but even though he quote unquote doesn't believe in ring rust, he hasn't fought in, I think, since the Cody fight. And that was 2 years ago, maybe even 3 years ago, but probably more 2 years ago. And Cejudo just seemed too quick for him. Dominic seemed slower than we're used to seeing him, a little bit more sluggish. I'm torn on the decision to stop the fight because Cejudo in the second round caught him, knocked him down, then just pounced on him and hit him with 11 straight unanswered shots. But Dominic was trying to fight his way up, and he was on his way to standing up, even though he was getting that barrage of punches. It didn't seem to be clean, hard punches. Dominic was definitely wobbled from that first punch, obviously, that knocked him down. But the subsequent 11 unanswered shots didn't seem to be phasing him because he was working his way up. And the ref wound up stopping it, and immediately after the stoppage, Dominic Cruz, expressed discontent and was kind of sort of arguing with the ref and telling him, I'm getting up. What the fuck? Why are you stopping it? And Cejudo won. But honestly, it seemed like it was going, the momentum at least, in Cejudo's favor up until that point, because Dom wasn't really evading all of his punches like he normally does with his amazing movement and style of fighting. And it seemed like Cejudo was going to get the better of him. But I'm definitely torn on that stoppage because although he was getting up, he did also get hit 11 times unanswered. So it's at that point, it's in the hands of the refs. And if the ref calls it, you, as the fighter, put yourself in that position or allowed yourself to be put in that position. So it's definitely disappointing. Then Cejudo, at the end of it, said he's retiring, which just seems like another publicity stunt or ploy or whatever. But I was completely indifferent about it. I was just all right, yeah, whatever, retire. Then the main event, Tony Ferguson versus Justin Gaethje, the very much anticipated return of Tony Ferguson, or not even return because he actually just fought Pettis not too long ago and looked spectacular in it. That was his return fight. He was supposed to fight Khabib Nurmagomedov, who was quarantined in Russia and unable to leave because of COVID. Justin Gaethje stepped in the 11th hour and took the fight on short notice for the lightweight interim title bout. Justin Gaethje was thought to not have he has a chance in that. In every fight, every fighter has a chance, but he's no slouch either. You know what I mean? He's he was the top, definitely top 5 in the division, I want to say. Maybe even 3 or 4. But Tony Ferguson was thought to be the only guy that could give Khabib, which is the champ, undefeated champ in the division, the only one that could give him comp. And Tony was the champ in the division before he got hurt and had these setbacks and wound up getting stripped. And the clash between him and Khabib was supposed to happen. It's like a cursed fight. They literally made the fight, I think, 5 separate times. And something happened. Something makes the fight not happen. And it was like Khabib, getting sick and being hospitalized, and Tony, slipping on a fucking cable and having to have knee surgery while they were doing like the press conferences for one of their fights, and shit like that happened 5 times total. I think this is the 5th or the 6th time. It's like fucking cursed. But anyway, Tony didn't look like himself. He didn't use elbows much, if at all, which was super surprising to me, because that was like, he's known for each and every one of his opponents looking like hell after the match, whether win or lose. They're all like cut up, and it's in a large part due to his unorthodox striking, but mainly his elbows cut the shit out of his opponents' faces, and he barely used them in this fight. Gaethje, which was thought to, if he had a chance, it had to be like an explosive, like first round, maybe beginning of the second round, but after that he would start gassing, and Tony would definitely like just pick him apart. That's what most of the pundits expected. And Gaethje fought excellent fucking fight, a poised fight, a professional, measured, I know how to beat this guy fight. It looked like he had a game plan, stuck to it to a T, and it worked. And he outstruck Tony Ferguson. Tony Ferguson's face looked like the one that was all fucked up at the end. Ferguson looked fresh. It was a 5th round KO, TKO. The ref wound up stopping it. And to Tony Ferguson's credit, he's like a fucking zombie, this guy. He was eating everything. Everything that Gaethje could throw at him, he just ate it. So much so that it looked like he did like this weird shit where he was just like nodding his head, like standing up, like shaking his head, like after getting punched a few times. And I think that's when the ref stopped it, because it was like, what the fuck is he doing? Like, is he knocked out standing up or something? Like, it was like some weird zombie shit. And it was a very unexpected outcome for most, including myself, but definitely a dope fight to watch. I'm really interested to see the fights that get made now after this, because the way it was thought that it was going to go was going to be Tony Ferguson is going to be Gaethje. Gaethje might fight Conor, and then Tony Ferguson, definitely fight Khabib. And then, the winner, if Conor wins against Gaethje, then he would get the winner between Tony and Khabib. But Gaethje just threw a wrench into that whole thing. Now, Conor is thought to maybe be fighting Kamaru Usman, going up in weight to fight him for his title. Gaethje, I think, wants Khabib to because now he's the interim champ. He wants to, unify the belt. But Khabib is on Ramadan now, and he usually doesn't fight during the summer. So they're saying like maybe if Ramadan is over this year by July, or if not, then probably like in August sometime they'll fight, like in the fall. Tony Ferguson is going to get right back into it, I'm sure, and be in the mix again sooner than later. So definitely interesting shit that's happening now within that division. And that, folks, was UFC 249. My coronavirus update. As of today, the evening of May 25th, 2020, as I'm recording this. First and foremost, my brother tested positive. Shout out to David. And I believe, if I remember correctly, that he tested positive for the antibodies, which means that he had it and beat it, which is thankfully the case. And even more thankfully the case that he didn't give it to anyone in his immediate family, his kids, his girl, or to our parents or anybody else that he had exposure to. And stories like that are becoming more and more the norm, which is why there's like more of a push now, more so than before, to reopen things. Certain states are reopening, including New York State. It's reopening in phases. It's not that case within New York City yet completely, but you're starting to see the culmination of the antsiness of people coupled with meeting benchmarks of positive cases and deaths continuing to go down, and the local government's beginning to implement strategies and implementing plans to reopen. I see it now when I go out for essentials. Like, you notice more people out, you notice more traffic. Definitely here in New York, like, everyone's wearing face masks, which is a little weird. There's something like depressing about that, even though, I'm wearing my mask as well. And I think it's a good thing. I think it's a good idea. There's been a lot of flip-flop, even from like Dr. Fauci at different points in time stating, don't wear the mask, it's not effective, and then flipping to wear the mask, it is effective. And I feel like that's just a testament of the data that's out there at that point in time, especially by folks that are, driven by data and numbers and figures, like doctors and the healthcare community in general. At any given point in time, you have a certain amount of data that drives a type of decision, and then, fast forward a couple weeks or sometimes even a couple of days in certain circumstances, and based on the data and information that you have available, then you have a complete 180. That's how hectic and crazy this whole disease has been. But I'm definitely not crazy about this, like, this isn't that bad, quote unquote, hype. Like, I'm not sure how I feel about that. Like, people that are, like, downplaying it, like, a little too much, I feel. And I get the whole, want and need, which I also agree with, for the economy to reopen, for businesses to reopen so that the economy can begin to roll again. Because at some point, there is a point of diminishing returns, right? If you continue to only shelter in place and have small businesses suffer, record unemployment, people cooped up in houses, mental health issues on the rise, spousal abuse and molestation abuse, and like that type of shit that occurs more so when folks are cooped up together, like all that shit is not good either, right? Like, there's a point of diminishing returns. Like, there's a balance here somewhere that I feel like as a country, we're trying to, like, as a world really, and different places of the world are at different points in time with this, but that we're all trying to calibrate and find the perfect equilibrium for. And I wonder, what if we didn't, especially here in New York, shelter in place, and what if we didn't take the precautions that we took and continue to take? Would we have bent the curve down? Would it have been worse? Would it have been better? Because we would have had some sort of, like, herd immunity. I don't think we know. I don't think anyone can know. That's like some sliding doors, alternate reality type shit. But I do believe that aspects of what we did worked, right? Like, the reason why we shelter in place, the reason why we wear masks, the reason why we social distance, the reason why those precautions were put in place and followed for the most part were for this outcome, right? Like, we wanted this to be the case. We wanted things to begin to normalize again. We wanted the curve to drop and continue to drop as it's doing now. So I kind of sort of see that as what we did over the past 2 months. It's been working. Like, it worked. Like, good job. Good on us. But I'm absolutely definitely for, now that we're at a safer point, to begin reopening things and begin the upward trajectory to the quote unquote new normal. And again, I'm speaking from New York City epicenter perspective. I know that in some places, like in LA, there's like heavy criticism over there of like Governor Newsom and Mayor Garcetti. And I kind of get it from their perspective with the folks there, because it was like a fraction of the cases and the deaths of New York, and an even more authoritative approach to the shelter in place, and even extending certain shelter in place orders. And there was this like one like viral clip that I saw where I think it was either Garcetti or Newsom. They ordered the like Parks Department or whoever takes care of the beaches over there. There was a skate park near beach, and kids were going, still skateboarding and biking there and stuff. There's like this video of like a tractor trailer taking sand from the beach and like filling the skate park in with sand so they can't use it. It's like, that, like, is that necessary? Just put a fucking cop there giving tickets or some shit if you want to like deter that from happening, if that. So yeah, I agree with continuing to like OD in the direction of sheltering in place and all these regulations is probably not the most feasible approach when looking at the situation from a holistic point of view, and when numbers are all going in the positive direction. And by numbers, I mean number of positive cases and deaths. But I don't want to go too far in the opposite direction either, to just wind up having a second wave and being in the same situation again, when we can ease out of this situation. And it might take a little bit longer than, say, ripping off the Band-Aid, but we'll get to a stabilized place, I feel, versus saying, ripping off the Band-Aid, I think throws away what we did over the past, or what we achieved over the past 2 months, and risking like setting ourselves back to having to do the shit all over again. in the same strict way. Now, something that I am a little worried about, I guess would be the proper terminology, or concerned about might be better, or keeping an eye on. It's this whole contact tracing thing. And I'm reminded of things like the Patriot Act and the freedoms that Americans gave up in terms of surveillance and due process in exchange for certain safeties in relation to terrorism. And I'm reminded of the famous Benjamin Franklin quote that I've regurgitated a bunch on this podcast, but is definitely worth restating in this context, which is, quote, "Those who give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety," end quote. And this whole contact tracing thing reminds me of those two things. It's like the only way I see it happening is with folks opting in. Hopefully it's an opt-in, because if not, it's just like complete Big Brother shit. But folks opting into giving the names and numbers of, if you test positive for COVID, right? Giving the names and numbers of people that you've come in contact with to the state. Then the state will be calling those people, and it's going to come up on New Yorkers' phones as New York State contact tracing or something like that. And it's to notify those people, hey, somebody that you came in contact with tested positive, you should go get tested. And then that chain continues until all folks are contacted and tested, etc. And although I'm torn on this, because although I believe that testing is essential to know who's had it, especially if you're out and about and you're not sheltering in place and you're not, doing all the other normal shit, from a data perspective, also to know like the scope of how, big was this? Does everybody have it? And then that changes the whole conversation of how fatal it is. But I'm torn because it feels, and that's just like one version of like this contact tracing thing, that feels intrusive. That feels maybe even overly intrusive, but necessary. I don't know. I'm not entirely sure. I know that Michael Bloomberg, former mayor of New York, is heading a project in this sphere of contact tracing. And me personally, I like Bloomberg as a mayor, but he definitely leans on that I know best authoritarian side of things in certain aspects, with things like stop and frisk, with things like extending for a one-time only the term limits for city officials. When he was mayor, he was a mayor for 3 terms altogether. At the end of his second term, towards the end of his second term, he tells the city council, hey, I got this loophole. If I propose this and you guys sign it, I get 3 terms instead of 2. It's going to be a one-time only thing. And if you guys do it, I'll put into it that you guys get to extend your term limits as well. So it's a completely self-serving thing. Every city council member at that point in time and the mayor all got the eligibility to run for 3 terms, as opposed to being term limited out after 2 terms. He did that. The no smoking thing indoors. Although when that happened, I was working in a bar restaurant at a time that you could smoke indoors. I was an avid smoker, smoking over a pack a day. And when that happened, when that law passed, I was still for it. Because even though I was in the position of a smoker who's, quote unquote, liberty of being able to smoke wherever I want was being taken away, I knew and felt that it was a positive thing. And I took myself out of the equation, and, it was something that I agreed with no matter what. But I do recognize Bloomberg's authoritarian leanings when it comes to policy. So I'm a little hesitant to be all in on this whole contact tracing thing, especially with Bloomberg involved to the degree that he is. And especially that his involvement is in partnership with the state, Andrew Cuomo, which has always been at odds with current mayor Bill de Blasio, which is the successor of Mike Bloomberg as mayor of New York City. So there's a lot of interesting shit at play there. But yeah, man, on a lighter note, I do think we're coming to the end of this. I see a light at the end of the tunnel. Hopeful that we do get some positive outcomes from this, with things like more working from home for employees of companies that realize that they don't need as much expensive real estate and overhead of office buildings in the most expensive real estate locations on the planet, being New York City, specifically Manhattan. A lot of companies are realizing productivity not going down with employees working from home, employees realizing that they have more family time, less stress from commuting, just overall happier working from home. So I feel like that's going to be part of a positive or cultural shift that happens post-corona. Hopefully we'll see more manufacturing within the U.S., like that continue to ramp up. Less of a dependency of like outsourcing every fucking thing that we outsource and just being a service economy. And although, seeing everybody like with masks and that being like a little weird and depressing, maybe we'll see a cultural shift in, like here in New York, like sometimes we see like Asian people wear masks. Like that's like a culture thing with Asian folks where they'll, like if they have a cold or they're feeling sick or whatever, they'll just, throw on a mask. Maybe that'll become more of the norm here within New York. I think that might be a good thing. And just generally like staying home if you're not feeling well. Like a lot of people go to work sick because they feel like they have to, but especially if you have now the ability to work from home, maybe we see less of that, but we'll see. I guess we'll see, right? But yeah, folks, continue to stay safe and hopefully we'll be out of this shit sooner than later. Better Call Saul season 5 was a dope season. I like the show, obviously. That's why I watch it. That's why I watched the first 4 seasons. But after the 4th season, I felt that this upcoming season, the 5th one, would probably have to be the last one. I thought it was going to be the series finale. I didn't see where else they can go with the character of Jimmy McGill. And I felt like it was overlapping too much already with the storyline of Saul Goodman. And the idea is, at least from my perspective, that once that those two worlds clash, once that overlap, that like the middle part of the Venn diagram between Jimmy McGill and Better Call Saul, once that gets big enough, then that's it. You're into the Breaking Bad story or storyline of this world. So I felt like that didn't have the room to play with much in a 5th season or in a 6th season, and they would wrap things up in the 5th season. But Vince Gilligan, Peter Gould, you never cease to amaze me. This was a great season, and now I feel like they could do a 6th and a 7th. And I'm probably wrong on that. They might wrap it up like in the 6th or something like that, but who knows? Maybe it'll be the Fast and Furious franchise style of spin-off shows, and they'll be like Better Call Saul season 10. And then a Mike Ehrmantraut show. Anyway, it is a really good season. And I feel like it even, where I felt in the 4th one, like it was winding to a close. Now I feel like that was just like the bottom of the roller coaster. And now it's the 5th one is like sliding its way back up to like the next peak. I learned from this season that, which like lays the seeds for the Saul Goodman character of how he always gets shit done, even if it's like in a sleazy kind of way. Like we see these seeds of that personality trait that Saul Goodman has in Breaking Bad begin in Jimmy McGill, or he always kind of sort of had the seeds, but now he's like watering those seeds and consciously doing so. And he'll always find an angle to get what he wants. And in fact, in this season, he is Saul Goodman already when he's practicing law. Because in the beginning, in the very last episode of season 4, when he's going to begin practicing law again, he also submits for a name change for Saul Goodman. So in this season 5, when he's still Jimmy, and he's doing that transition between Jimmy and Saul Goodman, but he uses the Saul Goodman name for practicing law. And we see him getting into bed with and taking on as clients more unsavory characters like drug dealers and cartel members and drug users and hookers, kind of sort of under the guise of, hey, they need representation too. But I think on the flip side, seeing it as, if I'm going to get down and dirty, I'm going to do it with these folks and make a quick buck while I'm at it. And they're not going to judge or cast judgment on me, rather, and my integrity, because what they're doing is far worse. I feel like there's a little of that going on in Jimmy's head and his decision making. And he will absolutely do anything and everything he could to win a case or win a client over, etc. Like he used these like visual aids to get a client. Like he was at his door and he was like, just look at this. Let me just show you these 3 pictures. And the guy doesn't want to give him like the time of day. And he's like, if after this you don't want to deal with me, I'll just walk away. I'll leave you alone. This is the guy that was holding out on like the Mesa Verde deal. Like he didn't want to like sell them his house so that they can build on the land. And he was like the last house that was holding out. And he shows him a picture of a horse fucking a guy or something like that. Like a man getting fucked by a horse or a man fucking a horse, something like that. And the guy's like just so taken aback. He's like, what the fuck? And he's like, it says something, I'm paraphrasing and probably fucking it up, but it says something to the effect of, if you let me represent you, I'll make sure that you never get fucked this way by them or some shit like that. But basically got the guy's attention and wound up getting him as the client and getting his way, right? And he's always like skating the line between legal and unethical. And even in the courtroom, he's deliberating a case. Judge is there, the jury. There's a witness of someone who robbed a convenience store and shot the clerk. I don't remember if there was like camera footage, but this was like an eyewitness person. And they were like, and Jimmy asked him, can you point out the person that did the crime? And she was like, yeah, it's your defendant, the person you're defending, sitting right there with the, white shirt, blah, blah, blah. He wrapped up the case by saying, you know what, actually, this is not the person. The person that is my client is actually sitting in the back of the courtroom right now. This is a sit-in. So you clearly don't know who the person was or whatever because you're mistaken. And this person that you just pointed out was actually, has an alibi and, is just like a sit-in person and, lived across, was somewhere else at the time the crime took place. So that person couldn't be implicated, but then the credibility of the witness was shot because the real person that was his client that was in question is like in the back of the courtroom. So the judge had to throw out the case and like he would do shit like that. What else? It was a good season. There was a lot of Jimmy and his now wife, Kim, which they got to a point where she was about to leave him. And she was like, we either have to call this off or get married. And they wound up getting married. And they did that because, she'll have that, not client privilege. It's like a plausible deniability type of thing. Like a wife can't or a husband can't testify against, a spouse can't testify against the other person's, their spouse by law, something like that. I don't know. But point is that their relationship was definitely a through line within this season. More so than others, I would say. You know what's dope? Don Eladio from the show is fucking Manny from Scarface. And I feel like I noticed that, or I should have noticed that in previous seasons, but I didn't. Or maybe I did and I just forgot, but I definitely remember it now. So I thought that was pretty cool. And there was a dope episode that was a bit reminiscent of the Breaking Bad episode when it was just Walter White and Jesse. And it was like the Fly episode, that the entire episode was just them two in the lab. And there was like a fly that was like recurring throughout the episode that they were trying to like kill. Some people loved that episode. Some people hated it. There was an episode or maybe even 2 episodes. I think it like overlapped. But that was mainly about Saul and Mike. And they were in the desert together because Saul went to go pick up this drug money for the cartel, his client that was in jail, and he needed to make bail, and it was like, I forget how much, like, I don't remember if it was like $700,000 or like $7 million or $2 million or some shit like that. And he went to go pick up the money cash in the middle of the desert. He picked it up. Saul's on his way back. Then he gets like hijacked by this like gang, and they knew the drop was happening, and they're about to kill him. And Mike was in the desert, like watching over Saul's back without him knowing, and wound up like sniper rifle picking off like each of these guys that were robbing them and killing them. And then their car was shot up, so they had no way of getting out of the desert except walking through it. So it was like a whole episode about them too. And I actually really liked the episode. It was a dope insight into both those characters in an interesting situation to see both of them in and to see how they get out of it. It's a dope episode. It was a dope season, man. I recommend it to you guys. If you haven't gotten into Better Call Saul, I highly recommend it, especially if you're a Breaking Bad fan. This is one of those spin-off shows that definitely does the main original show justice. And it's an amazing show in and of itself, even if you didn't watch Breaking Bad. Actually, it would be interesting once it's all said and done, once Better Call Saul is over, and this is a series finale. If you haven't watched Breaking Bad, to then watch Breaking Bad after Better Call Saul, like see it in the reverse order, that would be interesting. Anyway, folks, that's it. That's all I got. That is episode 154 of the Spun Today Podcast. Spotify, if you're listening, I think you need a Dominican podcast on your roster. I have no shame in helping you meet your diversity quota. Let me stop. All right, folks. Thanks very much for listening. I'm your host, Tony Ortiz. Stick around, listen to some tunes in the background that YouTube will flag my episode over. But fuck it. For now, it's a vibe. Then listen to some ways you can help support this show. Peace.
Niña dice en la salsa. Niña viste en la salsa, tumbando la casa. Como Kid Frost, this is por la raza. Como YG, fuck Donald Trump. Desde MTI sonando en islos. Creamos túneles en tu pinche wall. Trabajando duro pa' gastar en el mall. Me buscan en retenes por tirar papeles verdes. Como si fuera nada, porque el money no es nada. Cuando no había money ya tenía un par de honeys. Antes de tener honey siempre andaba con los homies. Buscando problemas o escribiendo temas. Huyendo de la poli, rebelde hasta las venas. Traigo la receta secreta para darte salsa de México directa, para darte salsa bien bien buena, como el biri bam bam de Selena. Salsa.
Hey folks, Tony here, and I hope you're enjoying the show as much as I enjoy putting it together for you. If you'd like to support, I'd really appreciate it, and we'll give you a one-stop shop of sorts on how to do so. If you can make your way over to spuntoday.com/support, you'll find a bunch of different ways where you can do just that. There you'll find an Amazon banner similar to the other banners found throughout my website that you can click on and will take you to Amazon where you can do your shopping like you normally do. This will not cost you anything extra, and Amazon will pay me a percentage just for driving traffic to their website. It's a great way to help support the show financially without actually having to come out of pocket. At spuntoday.com/support, you'll also find links to my Patreon and Ko-fi pages. Patreon and Ko-fi are two similar websites where you can set up reoccurring donations for the show. If you want to donate $1 per month, $1 per episode, $100 per episode, whatever you like. You can check out either one of those two services there. There's actually also a Patreon video that's kind of like a little tutorial explanation video of how Patreon actually works. Also at spuntoday.com/support, you'll find a direct donation button where you can donate by way of PayPal. You'll find a link to Apple Music, which works similar to the Amazon banner. You can click on it, it'll take you to Apple's website where you can do your purchasing like you normally do, and again, it does not cost you anything extra, but I will get paid a percentage just for driving traffic to their website. And you'll also find links to the Spun Today viral style store. This is where you can get Spun Today related merch, and you'll find things like these cool premium t-shirts that have writing related sayings on them that I put together myself. I'm definitely not a clothing designer by any stretch of the imagination, but I put together things that I wanted to see and wear myself. A couple of my favorites are the one that says writing is life, and another one that says write need every day, and it has like a puff of smoke looking design right behind those words. You'll also find a Spun Today coffee mug and a really cool color changing mug that's related to my debut novel Fractal. It's completely black, and when it gets hot, when you put it in coffee or tea, it starts changing to white, and it also exposes the cover art for my novel Fractal. It's pretty dope. So definitely check all that stuff out, which again, you can find by going to spuntoday.com/support. And of course, do not forget to follow me on all of your social media, at Spun Today on Twitter, at Spun Today on Instagram, subscribe to the Spun Today YouTube channel, where you can find clips and excerpts from the podcast, along with other cool content. Like the Facebook page at facebook.com/Spun Today. Also, don't forget to check out all the free shit that I have on my website as well. Go to spuntoday.com/free writing. And there you're going to find dozens and dozens and dozens of free writing pieces that you can check out for motivation and inspiration and just some general food for thought. You can check out some of my photography at spuntoday.com/photography. Feel free to take any of those pictures and use them as you wish. I set it up so that you can copy and download the photos. And my short stories are available at spuntoday.com/short stories. And last but certainly not least, my Pride and Joy Corner, spuntoday.com/books. Here you will find my published books, which you fine folks can find links to purchase them on Amazon, whether you want hard copies or digital Kindle copies. That's the spot for you. Thank you very much for being a Spun Today listener, and as always, substitute the mysticism with hard work and start taking steps in the general direction of your dreams. Thanks for listening.